They say a forest isn't empty just because you can't see what's inside it. From a distance, the trees look like a single wall of green. Step closer, and the wall dissolves into 1,000 dark aisles, narrow and watchful, each inviting you in on its own terms. In the fall of 2002, Officer Dana Hale, 30 years old, Clackamas County Sheriff's Office, stepped through one of those aisles for the last time and did not come back. Her case did not begin as a legend or even a headline. It began with a phone call about a missing boy. 1. Profile of a professional. By all accounts, Dana was not the reckless type. Born in Salem in 1972, raised between coastal drizzle and valley heat, she learned map and compass navigation from her father, Thomas Hale, a park ranger who had little patience for people who trusted a trailhead brochure more than a topo. Her mother, Karen, a nurse, could read a pulse through winter gloves and make warm soup taste like an apology. Dana joined a volunteer search and rescue team at 17, the academy at 23, and took a position with the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office shortly after. She was not flashy. The words most used for her were steady, careful, consistent. She preferred the early shift. She logged the kind of reports others put off, her handwriting tilted a little right, sharp and compact. She lived alone in a rented one-story near Estacada, a town clinging to the river's bend. Neighbors saw her jog with a shepherd mix named Scout in the blue hour before dawn. Every other Sunday, she brought her Nikon to the abandoned railroad trestle and tried to catch fog pretending to be smoke. If she had romantic entanglements, they stayed off the police net and out of the break room. What she did have, according to Officer Rick Latham, her partner on and off for 3 years, was a stubborn streak that made her ideal for missing person cases. She would run a grid twice if rain had fallen between sweeps. She would come back on her own time to ask the one awkward question everyone else avoided. She was patient with people and impatient with loose ends. 2. The Boy at Clear Creek, October 21, 2002, 6:17 a.m. The dispatcher logged a call from Kelsey and Martin Miller of Sandy, Oregon. Their son Evan, 16, had failed to return from a solo overnight near Clear Creek Ridge. He was a reliable kid-honor-roll scout, outdoorsy but not defiant. He had texted his mother a woods-lined photo at dusk. Just trees, rain-silvered bark, a tent corner, and a grin. The caption, "Signal low, see you tomorrow." No messages after that. By 8:40 a.m., a basic search plan was scribbled on a laminated map. Weather, overcast, rain probable by afternoon, expected temperature drop after sundown. Terrain, steep sides, ravines with slick basalt, deadfall heavy from last winter's storms. Hazards, early ice on shaded rock, old logging roads disguised as meadows, and a scattering of shafts marked on pre-1980 Forest Service charts, but not on newer glossy maps. Volunteers set up a tent near the trailhead, a plastic table filled with clipboards, wax pencils, stacks of flagging tape. Dana arrived with Latham, signed out radios, and walked the initial sweep along Forest Road 46, the same number stamped into a leaning wooden milepost at the turnoff. Evan's sedan sat dusty and undisturbed. The tent at his chosen site was zipped to the halfway mark, the sleeping bag partly folded back. It looked like someone had stood, ducked out, and expected to return in a minute. Dogs took a line north for a quarter mile, broke left toward a dry creek, lost it on the stone. A volunteer found a stove in a mesh sack. Another found a bundle of paracord Evan's father confirmed from home. Nothing showed a fight or scramble. It was as though a pause had turned into a gap. "Run the grid again," Dana said, tapping a rectangle on the laminated map with a capped pen. "Open your eyes for the stupid stuff keys, gum wrapper, the wrong color moss. He leaves something of himself behind." "Or he sprained an ankle and bivvied in a bad place," Latham said. "We'll find him by lunch." They didn't. 3. The days that kept going. Day 1 bled into Day 2 dogs, flags, tight-lipped optimism. The Millers brewed coffee for strangers and wrote their son's name on paper cups. A helicopter shouldered through low cloud and drift like a blunt knife through wool. The chopper saw nothing unusual. The crew's report noted weather thickening on the ridge and recommended conservative footwork in the ravines. On Day 3, the rain sharpened and began to carve. Footprints softened into suggestions. Volunteers learned the forest's trick of making distance lie. The same route seemed to wait for the same boot and trip it twice. A man with a scar on his thumb insisted he had heard a metal noise, like a tool dropped onto steel between the pines. He couldn't say where. Rain erases place faster than ink. By Day 4, the optimism thinned. The search widened. They pushed the grid farther north and then farther east, where the map showed nothing interesting and the land disagreed. A ranger warned of an old windfall. They skirted it, and only the youngest volunteers tried to look unafraid. Dana re-walked the creek stones on her own time, boots quiet as arguments. On Day 5, October 26th, a K-9 team alerted briefly on a mossy cut where boulders stacked like neglected steps. A quick dig yielded small stones, roots, one broken brown bottle, nothing else. The handler shrugged, and the dog, embarrassed by its own enthusiasm, drank from a puddle and looked at its own reflection as if to apologize. On Day 6, the official operation prepared to scale down. The Millers learned how to disguise heartbreak as thanks. Dana wasn't done. 4. The last routine. Her shift log shows a passable day. She wrote a report others would have postponed, called a witness a second time, and coaxed the missing street number out of memory. And at 6:46 p.m., she pressed her radio and said calmly, "Unit 214 returning to Site B, final sweep." Dispatch answered with the voice of someone trying to run 6 channels at once. "Copy, 214. Status check, 22." She drove the county SUV east. The dashcam caught trees in their endless line dance, and the road thinning into 2 tire-worn threads, then the glare of rain in headlights, then static. The recording continued for 9 minutes, but the last minute is the one people play again, even when it gives nothing. There is only a hiss, and then a heavy, hollow sound. 3 slow knocks on metal, as if someone had tested a pipe with the butt of a tool to see if it answered back. That was not the last sound anyone ever heard of her. It was just the last one anyone recorded. By 10:22 p.m., dispatch requested the status check. No reply. By midnight, Latham was ripping tape off the map table and rolling out in his own truck because patience was obeying him too slowly. He found Dana's SUV the way nightmares prefer things. Nothing spectacular, only wrong by degrees. The driver's door stood open half a foot. The dome light flickered between always on and on when it pleases. The jacket she wore when she wanted to be warm but not slow lay on the driver's seat. Sleeves crossed, like she had meant to come back soon and chose the path of least complication. The radio handset rested on the passenger seat, its antenna bent at a thorn's angle. The keys were in the ignition. The engine was off. The warmth was gone. He shouted her name because leaving it in his chest felt like dropping it down a well. The forest held it like a coin and didn't spend it. 5. The search for the searcher. At sunrise, the forest looked older, as if night had quietly added a year to every trunk. The largest county manhunt in memory spun up deputies from 2 counties, state troopers, firefighters whose people belonged to these hills back before maps cared what a hill was called. Coffee and clipboards returned. The Millers watched with faces children wouldn't have recognized. The sheriff, who had liked Dana's paperwork more than he had liked being told he had misread a map once, stood beside the Millers with his hat in his hand and did not pretend. A dog took her scent from the SUV seat, walked it to the service trail, and then left the trail like someone making a point. The path bent through sword ferns and toward the murmur of water. The dog put its nose up, not down, as if reading words hung from branches. It led the handlers to a cluster of stones, slick as new fruit. There, in the lee of a rotted trunk, searchers found the first object, her badge, face down in muddy duff, its backing bent and scratched. 4 yards uphill, half in a puddle, lay her cap. The cap's bill showed no scuff, as if it had not been dragged. The cap had simply decided to be on water, and was. Why drop the badge? Someone asked. Or who pulled it? No one liked either answer. They cast outward. No scrape or drag sign, no snapped branch that did not look like it had snapped last year. A stand of younger cedar curved like hands around a hollow that said it used to be a stump and was done with that now. A volunteer with a carpenter's patience knelt and stared at a patch of soil where the color changed in a line too straight to be wind. He pressed with the pad of a finger. The soil gave and then resisted like a memory. He looked up and shook his head because saying maybe felt like lying. They expanded the grid. They found practical things misplaced by other people on other days. They found a plastic whistle, no initials. They found a bottle cap more interesting than useful. They found the forest acting like it did not know anyone had ever walked there and was not currently being asked to remember. They also found, between noon and 1, that radios fuzzed to a low carrier hum in 1/4 acre patch and, upon stepping out of it, cleared. A tech said it was terrain bounce. A ranger said it was quirky rock. Someone else said it was just a bad day for electricity. At 3:14 p.m., an officer called a hold. Some marks in the mud near a root cluster. 3 parallel lines, each 3 inches long, evenly spaced, as if made by the same thing with 3 edges. Not claw, not boot. A scrap of chain perhaps dragged and then lifted. A careful photograph was taken. A ruler was placed. The marks filled the frame like a polite answer that refused to explain itself. By sundown, rain hardened. The sheriff told the press that searchers would work through nightfall and reevaluate at dawn. He told the Millers, "We are not stopping." He told himself that the sentence had been long enough to be true. 6. Paper, tape, and air. The first week after an officer vanishes is not a week. It's one long day that runs out of food and grows new minutes in the dark. Report writers became triage nurses, sorting statements by fever and relevance. A whiteboard multiplied columns. The FBI sent a liaison who disliked the phrase, "no evidence of foul play," because absence and innocence are not the same thing. They ran Dana's financials, her call history, her internet. Nothing clicked louder than habit. No lover. No debt. No hidden travel. She had filled her gas tank 2 hours before her last known location. She had bought beef jerky and 2 bottles of water, and then stood in the parking lot for 40 seconds, reading the receipt as if it might teach her something, then folded it in half and tucked it into the left pocket of a jacket she would leave on a seat. The dashcam tape made the rounds of the small, dark rooms where people sit and ask machines to give them one more second of clarity. The best take produced a waveform showing the 3 metallic knocks as distinct strikes separated by a pause so precise a metronome would be smug about it. The tech circled the peaks in red and wrote impact on resonant surface. Someone else wrote pipe, culvert, hatch. Someone underlined hatch and then, in a different pen, scratched it out. The SUV showed nothing human in its dust. The only prints on the frame belonged to officers. No blood. No hair. A single pine needle caught in a rubber weather strip like punctuation. A searcher found, 2 days later, a pen light half swallowed in ferns, 60 yards from the SUV. The letters DH had been scratched into aluminum with something better suited to paper. The penlight didn't appear in the first day's evidence log, not because it wasn't there, but because the world in rain is good at pointing fingers in the wrong direction. Maybe she went in after the boy, someone said. Maybe she fell. Maybe the creek took both. Which creek? Someone else asked. The map suggested 3 candidates, and then grew quiet. 7. Families and weather families mark time with casseroles when they can't mark it with clocks. The Millers moved through the tent as if a person could physically stand between despair and others' pity. Karen Hale came to the site and stood too far from the table where maps lay, because closeness to lines began to feel like a betrayal of the person drawn to the other side of them. She nodded when people said, "We're doing everything," and nodded again when they said, "Anything you need." She learned how to look grateful without promising to believe. A storm blew in on November 2nd and recut the ravines with water thick as muscle. Any sign that had been shy about surviving decided not to. The helicopter grounded. Someone said, "We'll get back in there as soon as it lets up," and the sky answered by being heavy. "Close for now," the sheriff finally said, which is what you say when you are not closing. The word "suspended" sat on the report like a lid that promised to open later. That night, Latham drove the logging road alone and parked where the SUV had been, not because he expected to find anything, but because he could not imagine being in a kitchen while not finding anything. He turned off his engine. The forest hoarded the sound in its pockets. He told himself he would sit 5 minutes, then 10, then leave. He told himself that 3 faint knocks he thought he heard were memory bouncing between trees and striking a surface he had supplied. He forced himself to stay for the extra 2 minutes that separate haunting from a trick of hearing. Then he drove home and told no one, because being believed is not the same as being helpful. 8. The file that won't sit. An official case file takes up less space than the weeks it consumes. The Hale file blue folder, clipped, annotated, grew heavier with addenda. Weather tables, cell coverage maps, radio interference logs that suggested something and proved nothing. A single Polaroid of the 3 parallel marks near the root cluster, bagged dirt with no idea how to be helpful, and the dash cam audio labeled Exhibit D. A veteran investigator who disliked the murmured word curse and the loud word mystery wrote in his margin hand. Consider known culverts, chalk hatches. Check decommissioned USFS maps for maintenance access. Cross with historical logging company infrastructure. He sent an email to a Forest Service contact who had worked there in the 70s. The reply came 3 days later. No record of a maintenance hatch at those coordinates. Some old research projects existed in the region, but nothing in our inventory there. The investigator underlined inventory 3 times and put his pen down as if the pen had been the problem. After 3 months, the file wore its weight like a halo, and nobody wanted to be the one to set it down. After 6, it settled on the shelf, where urgent becomes persistent. The department retired Badge 214 in a brief ceremony that made people cry, an expense of water where rain could not serve. 9. What the place remembers. If a forest remembers, it does so impersonally. Hikers reported over the next 2 years oddities that forests cough up like old nails, a compass that insisted west was north on one slope only, a camera that refused to take a picture within a ring of young firs and worked fine 20 yards outside it, radios that bled a steady carrier hum and snapped back to normal as if chastened. A hunter swore that after midnight he had seen 2 white lights deep among the trees, too steady for eyeshine, too low for a truck, and he felt embarrassed describing them, and angry that he felt embarrassed. A maintenance crew for a utilities company reported a metallic echo from a cut bank near Clear Creek while testing ground stability with a rod. The foreman wrote it off as an odd resonance. Hollow soil over stone can pretend to be steel if it wants attention. He filed his report and forgot it, and the report later slept in a drawer near the edge of a desk where drawers go to learn patience. Every October, Karen Hale called the sheriff's office and asked the same question in the same voice. Is there anything new in my daughter's case? The person on the line would look at the file, which did not change when looked at, and say, "We're still ready to follow any lead," and mean it, and know that leads do not obey readiness. 10. The evidence that didn't belong and did. 2 years after the disappearance, a county inventory turned up an item misfiled in a cardboard box once used for printer toner. A rusted evidence tag stamped, "Property of Clackamas County Sheriff's Dept." Evidence locker, 1979. No item attached, no notation linking it to Hale. It sat with old staples and a plastic ruler that had warped into a gentle smile. A clerk reboxed it into MISC, archive, and wrote the date in sensible numbers. The tag did not complain. Metal is patient. No one in 2004 connected 1979 to Clear Creek or to Alan Brewer, a Forestry Service field engineer who had failed to come home from a survey line in the same 10-mile radius. Brewer's last radio log mentioned lights by the ridge. His file thinner, yellowed, was not in the same building as Hale's. Fate has a good sense of humor when it files. But in 2002, and then in 2003, and in the years after, the Hale file still did what unresolved files do. It gathered dust and gravity. It taught young deputies to speak carefully to mothers, and it waited for the one person who would not accept the polite shape of silence. That person, it turned out, was the same rookie who had walked the creek bank on the first morning and watched a cap float like a decision. 11. The rookie who grew old enough, Detective Michael Rhodes, did not look like a reformer or a romantic. He looked like a man whose shoes once dried on a motel radiator and never quite lost the smell. In 2002, he had been the tall deputy who wrote good maps and bad jokes. By 2022, he had become the detective who preferred old files to new meetings and who knew that stubbornness is just faith looking for a place to sit. He would say later that the case did not haunt him so much as face him. Every time he climbed the archive ladder for another box, the Hale file looked at him like a person asking a small, fair favor. Try again, but differently. Trying differently began with an old habit. Lay 2 timelines side by side and watch them talk. He slid Brewer 1979 beside Hale 2002, and the paper inhaled. Same general coordinates, same season. Both mention interference. Both arrive, uninvited, at the same set of words in chalk on the whiteboard. Hatch, culvert, access, decommissioned, maybe. And both contain the sound of 3 slow metallic knocks recorded by different machines, separated by 23 years and the patience of weather. Rhodes did not at first believe in meaning by repetition. He believed in broken things, making the same noise when struck the same way. But he also believed in not pretending when the shape of coincidence becomes ungainly. He requested access to Brewer's evidence. The answer took a while to travel from a building that had changed apartments and back. When the box arrived, he lifted a cassette labeled Forest Audio No. 3 with the tenderness of someone handling a note, passed from one room in time to another. He borrowed a player. He pressed play. Wind. Static. 2 men. One says, "Interference again." The other laughs like a man arguing with his own breath. Then not loud, not dramatic, just hollow and certain 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. And nothing. So final, it felt deliberate. Rhodes sat still until the tape clicked. The little square window showed a spool idle, an eye refusing to blink. He rewound, listened again, then turned the volume down to 0, just to confirm that silence still counted as silence. He could have written odd echo. He could have written machinery. He could have written ignore. He did not. He signed a vehicle out, put a coil of cord in the trunk because men like him always put a coil of cord in the trunk, and he drove east toward Forest Road 46 as if the number had been waiting. 12. Back to the beginning. The road remembered his tires. At the turnoff, the post leaned a little farther than memory liked. He parked where Dana's SUV had stood and got out with the slow movement of a man who knows that sound makes other sounds decide what to do. The air smelled like cedar, wet soil, and the iron hint water wears when it has carried too much ground. Rhodes walked the ferns down to the boulder cluster and stood where the badge had lain. He closed his eyes and held his breath until his own pulse stopped advising him, and then he listened. That is the only trick. The forest does not try to impress you, but it will let you hear it exhaling if you quiet the room in your head. He opened his eyes and crouched. Something dull and straight hid under a sweep of grass where roots braided like plans. He reached in and drew out a penlight, the cheap kind department's order by the 100. The knurl was worn, the cap was dented. The clip had been bent and bent back until it remembered old shapes. Scratched, lengthwise careful, shallow were 2 letters. DH. He turned the penlight over in his palm. Its weight argued for sincerity. Its presence argued for accident. How else would it be here, and why else would it have avoided notice, if not because men in rain look ahead, and not at the privilege of their boots? He took a photograph and slid the penlight into an evidence bag and made himself write the time and place slowly, numbers deliberate, as if decorum could blunt wonder. Then he sat on the damp log a few yards off and considered the oldest question in the book. Had he just found something, or had something just found him? The forest offered no opinion, but as the light thinned and the air began to hold cold differently, somewhere beyond the first line of trunks and the second, a sound arrived, as though carried on the ribs of the ground. 3 slow metallic knocks, not loud, not close, spaced like someone counting without numbers. Rhodes stood. The sound did not repeat. He told himself it was a branch settling onto a culvert. He told himself it was an echo of his own memory. He told himself, out loud, because a man in a forest deserves to hear a human voice. You're here too late for ghosts, Michael. The forest, having been accused, did not defend itself. He marked the coordinates, walked back to his car, and drove out with the conviction that he had simply visited a place. He refused to turn the radio on. He refused to look in the rearview mirror more than law required. The road was a road. Night was night. Behind him, the trees stitched themselves together again, aisle by aisle, as neatly as they had parted. 13. What comes at these stories? Like this do not move in straight lines. They spiral and return. The official record of Officer Dana Hale ended that first season with the one word bureaucracy's hate, unresolved. But cases also have unofficial records, habits, hunches, and the way certain folders pull at a person's sleeve when he passes the shelf. What comes next begins with the penlight in a bag and a detective uneasy with polite answers. It moves through a vault where 1979 sits beside 2002 and pretends the years between them do not matter. It crosses a map that insists there is nothing under a certain slope and the sound of metal disagreeing. It involves a cap, a badge, a bent antenna, a radio carrier hum that blooms and dies in a circle drawn by no one, and a mother who still calls once a year because the number is easy to dial even when the question is not easy to bear. But that is part 2. For now, the last image is plain and clean. A small aluminum penlight, scratched DH, lying in a clear plastic bag under office fluorescence, looking like a trivial thing that has worked very hard to be found. It is not proof, not direction, not answer. It is only Dana, reduced to an object and refusing to be only that. In the margin of the intake form, a man whose handwriting had grown cramped with years wrote 3 letters he had no business writing into a box marked Notes. He wrote, Hatch? And then he stopped himself and put the pen down, because questions are sometimes better company than guesses. 14. The request. No one wanted to approve. Detective Michael Rhodes didn't blow trumpets when he reopened old files. He wrote memos that sounded like errands. His internal request read, Purpose. Consolidate legacy material to support training on rural missing person investigations. Secondary purpose. Audit of archived parallel cases, 1970-2005, for methodological updates. He attached neither the words Hale nor Brewer to the subject line. Bureaucracy is most helpful when it thinks it is doing something small. Access was granted with a shrug and a caveat about time. He signed for 2 carts of cold files and rolled them into an interview room whose blinds had learned how to ignore sunsets. He stacked Brewer, 1979, beside Hale, 2002, and a handful of other rural disappearances that lived within the same 10-mile ring as Clear Creek Ridge. The ring was not perfect. The land had not asked to be simplified, but the cluster was close enough to make a mind want to draw lines. He began with logs and maps, then with purchasing records, a habit he'd learned from a state investigator who once found a buried comms site by following an invoice for concrete. Government lies politely, he'd said. Budgets don't. The county's archived USFS correspondence for the late 70s was thin and oddly tidy. The USFS district office sent him 3 separate emails that could be summarized as, nothing to see here, but also we can't prove there was ever anything to see. He asked narrower questions. Culverts, stormwater, decommissioned infrastructure. The answers grew narrower too, which meant someone was doing work. When the paper stalled, he turned to people. Paper hates being alone for long. 15. Latham again. Officer Rick Latham agreed to meet at a diner whose coffee earned admiration only from men whose jobs kept them awake long after reason slept. He looked like grief that had gone quiet. Rhodes slid a plastic evidence bag across the booth. Inside lay the penlight marked DH. Latham didn't reach for it. He studied the bag as if it were a photograph of his own face taken on a day he didn't remember. Where? He asked. 60 yards downslope from the SUV position, Rhodes said. Under ferns. We missed it back then. We missed a lot back then. They talked through the first week. The cap, the badge, the 3 shallow parallel marks near the root cluster. The carrier hummed the radios acquired in a circle and then abandoned. Latham described something he'd never put on paper. A metal tag he'd found near the SUV the second night. A sliver stamped with a county mark and the number 1979. He hadn't logged it. He'd told himself it belonged to some old piece of road equipment and would only clutter the evidence list with coincidence. Rhodes listened without condemnation. Retrospect is a prosecutor with too much time. If you still have it. I don't. Latham's jaw tightened. I wish I did. They sat in the clatter and neon as if they were outside in rain again. When Latham finally reached for the bag, his hand hovered, then withdrew. She didn't do anything careless, he said. If the cap fell, it fell while she fought with paperwork or mercy, not because she was sloppy. Rhodes nodded. I want to talk to her mother. Latham looked at the window, not out of it. Be good at it, he said. She has paid more than your questions cost. 16. A mother's drawer. Karen Hale kept her apartment orderly the way nurses do after shift. Clean lines, quiet corners. She had learned how to answer, "How are you?" in a voice that saved her audience work. When Rhodes explained why he'd come, she studied his face the way a triage nurse studies pupils. You were the young one, she said. You brought the blankets that night. You were angry at the rain. I still am, ma'am. She led him to a drawer lined with manila envelopes. I kept copies of anything they gave me, and I kept anything of hers that felt like an arrow. Out came photocopies of reports and handwritten notes. Dana left herself in the week before she vanished. Trail names, distances, a sketch of a dry creek with an X by a stone. One page held 3 words in capital letters: Site B, return. In the margin, a smaller note: metal sound. The question mark wore a hard dot. Karen hesitated, then opened a wooden box he hadn't noticed on the sideboard. Inside lay a folded sheet of notebook paper that had gone soft at the creases. It came from her father's ranger files, she said. He kept odd clippings, old survey photos, maps. She found one and asked him about it, years before she disappeared, maybe 5. He said it was an old request from the Forestry Service to avoid a certain drainage for a while because of what was the phrase, maintenance activity. He couldn't find the memo later, but Dana wrote this. Rhodes unfolded the page, Donna's tidy hand. If not back by 2300, check Site B. There's an access of some kind. Metal under soil. Not natural. Might be old USFS or logging. If I don't return, tell Michael it wasn't an accident. Karen watched him absorb his own name. She always prepared for things she didn't want to happen, she said. She paid her bills 2 days early. She told the dog sitter who to call if she didn't come back from a search. You cannot imagine the cruelty of competence when hope would like untidiness instead. Rhodes asked permission to copy the note. Karen nodded and placed her fingers lightly against the page before letting it go. Find the thing, she said. Not the story. The thing. 17. The underground that might not be there. Old logging maps do not care about romance. They list spurs and splices and culverts with the precision of men who had to drive lumber out before the next storm. Rhodes signed out a stack from a county storage room that smelled like solvent and patience. He traced old lines over new topography and looked for places where a culvert would have made sense in 1970, but had no reason to now. 3 candidates emerged in a rough triangle straddling Clear Creek and the slope above Site B. He called Devin Sato, a geotech with a talent for explaining dirt to cops. They met at the trailhead. Sato carried a folding soil auger and the disdain of a man who had once been overruled by someone with better hair. Anything underground is either maintained or pretending, Sato said, turning the auger like an argument. If it was properly decommissioned, it'll be sealed or collapsed. If it wasn't, it might ring hollow for the wrong reasons. They sampled the first candidate just wet loam over stone, the second compact silt over root mass, and the third near a fat cedar whose roots ribbed the slope. Sato's auger sank 2 feet and then felt like it had met a table. That's not rock, Sato said. He rapped the auger with his knuckles. The sound came back with a timid echo. Plate. Could be a culvert end. Could be an access cover. Could be the world's most polite coffin. Don't quote me. They marked the spot with GPS. Rhodes said nothing the way a man says, "Thank you," when a choir begins in a room that had been quiet too long. Call me when you get permission to dig, Sato said. Rhodes almost laughed. Permission? Right. 18. The paper that blinked. Permission would require land status. Was the ground county, federal, private? Maps stacked like lies kept by honest people suggested a patchwork. The parcel containing the cedar belonged to the USFS, but a right-of-way from a defunct logging company laced through it like a forgotten vein. The county's council told him to tread carefully and write letters with kind salutations. He wrote. He waited. He visited Brewer's sister in a town that had let his name fade from its mouths. She showed him a shoebox with Polaroids of a man who liked water and wore hats badly. One photo, scrawled Nav 2, 79, showed a clearing at dusk hug of trees, a depression in the center, and something like a round edge of metal glinting under soil. He liked to photograph small oddities, she said, as if every puzzle piece mattered even before he found the puzzle. Rhodes scanned the photo, held it beside Dana's sketch of the creek bend. The curves fit like truth laid over instruction. He called USFS again and asked for decommissioned maintenance access records within the mapped quadrangle. The reply was quick and dull. No such records exist. He asked for purchasing ledgers instead. Steel plate, cable spools, lock sets, by fiscal year. The reply was slower and not dull. A ledger line item for temporary access, Project Hollow, C77, with vendor information redacted. Hollow rattled in the mind, like a word that had accidentally revealed what it was trying not to be. Project Hollow, he repeated aloud, alone with the copy machine. Machines do not answer, but the tone they make when paper exits feels sometimes like agreement. 19. The journalist who would outwait them. Rhodes wasn't the only one following dry trails. Mara Ellison, freelancer, had filed FOIA after FOIA and collected half a binder of glorified shrugs. She called him again. He picked up this time. "How about this?" she said before greetings were done. "You don't tell me what to write. I don't tell you how to investigate. And we pretend we're both chasing the thing instead of a version of it. What do you have?" "A ledger blip same as you, I think. Temporary access. Project Hollow." Also a utility work order from the 80s that mentions an interference complaint near Clear Creek AM broadcast issues. Funny noise on a local ham repeater. And an old USFS circular about signal integrity, studies in montane terrain. It's real, but clean. The edges have been sanded. "Your ham operator, does he have recordings?" "He says he does. And he says you won't like them because they don't prove anything." "Perfect," Rhodes said. They met on a Tuesday night in a library conference room that smelled like glue and meetings. Evan Laird, the ham operator, had the distracted look of men who keep track of the sky. He placed a thumb drive on the table, as if it were a small fish that might flop. "I was running the old K7 repeater in 2001-2003, he said. "We got carrier bleed from God knows where on wet nights. Nothing clean enough to triangulate. But a few times, within the same hour, we caught what sounded like don't laugh metal knocks. Same spacing. Not a pattern I could map to code. Could have been some joker hitting rebar with a wrench. But the path loss and timing," he shrugged. "It had the feel of something that wasn't trying to be heard, being heard anyway." Laird pressed play. Static slurred. A barometric hush grew. And then hollow, patient 3 knocks. Not loud, not performative, like a person counting by touch. "Where?" Rhodes asked. "Nearest I could tell, south-southeast of the Clear Creek Ridge. But repeaters lie when they're tired." "Time stamp?" "October 27th, same date as her last transmission, if the internet still remembers the archive right. I didn't know that until years later." Paper can hide. Audio is worse. But sometimes two frail things agree. 20. The survey that shouldn't have found anything. Rhodes filed for a limited ground survey authorization, no excavation, no intrusion, just GPR, ground-penetrating radar, along a narrow transect. Someone in a distant office initialed his letter, as if half paying attention. The slot was a Wednesday morning, with a forecast of drizzle enough to keep hikers away. Sato arrived with a cart that looked like a stroller designed by pessimists. They trundled the GPR unit over roots and apologies. The screen showed strata the way clouds show animals if someone suggests it first. At the cedar, the trace changed soil, then a flat reflector at shallower depth than the slope deserved, followed by a void signal that meant very little or too much. "Plate over air," Sato said. "Could be a culvert end or sealed access. Depth, maybe 0.7 to 0.9 meters. It returns clean uniform thickness. That's not a rock pretending to be metal. That's metal pretending to be ground." "Any utilities?" No registered lines here, Sato said. Which doesn't mean there's nothing. It just means you have company if you dig without asking louder than you've asked. Rhodes logged coordinates, photos, and screen captures. The forest went on breathing with professional detachment. 21. The meeting that almost killed it. He took his training memo and his not-at-all-a-hatch findings to the captain's office. He said the words, interference, historic culverts, site safety, liability, and public interest in a tone that reassured without lying outright. The captain, who liked Rhodes but liked being sued less, asked useful questions, and then the one that strands a lot of good intentions on desks. What's your end point? Open it, document it, either rule it out or bring the right agency in. And if the right agency already knows about it, then I would appreciate the courtesy of being told so I can stop borrowing GPRs. The captain scratched his jaw, chose a compromise from a shelf of compromises, and said, one day. Small team. USFS notified in writing. If they show and tell us to stand down, you stand down, and you do not become a YouTube star. I don't want conspiracy tourists camping on county land. Understood. And Mike, he added, don't get hurt. She wouldn't have wanted that to be the note your kids remember about you. Rhodes nodded, because he knew exactly the line the captain had just drawn, and exactly what it cost to draw it. 22. The day the ground opened. Politely. They returned at first light on a Thursday. Rhodes, Sato, a search and rescue colleague, Elena Cruz, who moved like knees had not yet betrayed her, and a paramedic pair who would stand back and make sure ambition didn't turn into bleeding. Shovels first. No power tools. The agreement said non-destructive exploration. Sato cut a neat rectangle in the duff and eased it aside like a rug. Beneath, loam, then compacted silt, then the rounded shoulders of a metal edge begging not to be obvious. Half round, Sato said, brushing carefully. Not a manhole. An access hatch, probably hinged, probably old. They worked slowly, exposing the lip. Rust had knotted around bolt heads. Cruz whispered an inventory of swear words that felt companionable. When the last crust gave way, the iron made a sound like an exhale someone had held since 1979. Hold, Rhodes said. He crouched, listening the way he had by the boulder cluster. The cool, rising air smelled like batteries and time. He lowered a light. The beam fell on corrugated steel, and a short ladder descending into a darkness so thorough it felt professional. Document from here, he said. Photos, measurements, a streaming feed for the captain. The paramedics did not love this part and said so with kindness. Rhodes went first. The ladder complained but didn't betray him. At the foot, a narrow service tunnel, steel-ribbed, cable trays on one side populated by dead cables, some jacketed, some cut clean, all filmed with dust, fine enough to remember. A junction box wore a USFS stencil so faded it could have been lying. A sign, plate-bolted, bent red research access, decommissioned 1973, in letters that still pretended to have authority. Cruz joined him, eyes adjusting. Sato stayed at the hatch like a man who understood leverage. They walked 10 yards. The tunnel ended in a sealed bulkhead with an inspection port caked in old fog. Cruz wiped the glass. Behind it, barely visible in the slant of the light, sat a room. Low shelves, 2 filing cabinets with their mouths slightly open, a desk with a metal cassette recorder resting like a patient hand. On the floor, just beyond the bulkhead's base, the beam found a police badge. Not muddied, not bent. Sitting as if someone had placed it with care where eyes would land first. Rhodes felt the strange quiet of adrenaline doing math. He took a slow breath, remembered training. Don't touch. Photo. Scale. Video. He read the number. 2414. Cruz's voice, very even. That's her number. It is, Rhodes said. Then how can it be here? he preferred not to answer questions using words like, because when everything else said wait. They finished documentation and withdrew, sealing the hatch loosely enough to cover the hole, not enough to pretend they were erasing anything. Back on the surface, the air felt wrong in the way air does after a long swim. "Call it in," Rhodes said. "Everything. The captain gets the feed. State gets the coordinates. USFS gets a courtesy copy." Sato was watching the trees. "You hear that?" "What?" "Nothing," Sato said. "That's not usual." Rhodes tilted his head. Forests hold quiet in many sizes. This one felt like a pause placed by a careful editor. They packed up. The paramedics said thank God in the relieved dialect. Rhodes filed, in real time, a brief that showed what they had found, and none of what he thought. At midnight, unable to insult his mattress with pretending, he drove back alone. Just to see it once more, he told himself, just to be sure the world hadn't changed its mind. The hatch was gone, not in the literal sense. The ground had been filled, tamped, brushed with duff like a good haircut. The dirt's color was too even, the pattern too new. A spray of red forestry paint on trees marked a line across the slope he hadn't seen at dawn. Men had been here, or the kind of men who prefer not to be called that. He stood very still, hands in his pockets, and promised himself not to dig with his boot, as if disrespect would uncover anything. Then, from somewhere, unplaceable, unhelpful, and exactly spaced came 3 metallic knocks. He did not run. He did not walk closer. He stood until the urge to be dramatic passed. Then he left because staying would not have been brave, only loud. 23. The phone call. That wasn't a conversation. The next morning, before he could edit his own memory into something less interesting, Rhodes's desk phone rang. Unknown number. The voice that came through sounded like someone trying not to be recorded. "Detective Rhodes," it said, neutral as a weather alert. "We received your coordinates. We appreciate the notification." "Identify yourself." A pause. "You're correct to escalate any public safety hazard you encounter. In the future, please direct such finds to the appropriate federal liaison before initiating exploration." "What site is this?" "It is a decommissioned research access. That's all the public record will support." "Then produce the public record." Another pause. "Your cooperation will be noted." The line went soft, then quiet. Not a hang-up, more like a door closed in a carpeted hallway. Rhodes looked at the phone like a man looks at a turned-back page he knows he will read again later in better light. He wrote the conversation into his notes under the title, "Call. No name provided." He added the sentence, "No assertion made or ownership of items in access." He kept the editorial comment to himself. 24. The tape on the desk. When they returned under official oversight, the hatch was not available to be found. The red paint line now extended like an arithmetic expression. A USFS truck idled on the logging road. 2 men in work clothes and clean boots spoke to the captain about soil stability and erosion mitigation, and did not mention research or access or the habit of certain governments to retain keys after declaring a door closed. Rhodes did not argue with men who were not there to be persuaded. He returned to the office and found a padded envelope on his chair with no return address. Inside sat a cassette tape, its label hand-printed in block letters. Hale, copy. He borrowed the old player in evidence and closed his door. Static. Distance. Then Dana Hale's voice, clear, measured, the way she sounded when she wanted other people to stay calm. Unit 214, Hale. Clear Creek drainage, Site B perimeter. Found hold on. A shuffle. Her breath in the mic. There's a metal sound under the soil near the cedar cluster. Like an access, not culvert shape. I'm marking coordinates. Rick, if you're monitoring, I'm not stepping on anything heavy until I have a second set of eyes. 3 knocks. Soft, patient, like a courtesy. That again, she murmured. The tape ate itself into static. It resumed with silence, then a short sentence, as if recorded later. If something happens, check under the roots. Click. End. Rhodes stared at the player, as if staring hard could construct a chain of custody out of air. He wrote, "Anonymous submission. Contents consistent with known voice. Provenance unknown." He photocopied labels, logged the envelope, and didn't mention the mad logic he wanted to accept, that someone had kept a fragment of her and had decided to let it live again. Now. 25. The meeting with Karen again. He drove to see Karen Hale with the envelope on the seat beside him, like cargo from a good dream. He did not play it for her first. He told her what it was, and what it might be, and what it could not be allowed to promise. She listened to the tape as if it were music from a room down the hall. When it ended, she folded her hands, the way nurses do before they replace a dressing. It was like her to say, "I'm not stepping on anything heavy." Karen smiled without warmth. She had a way of making caution sound like supervision. "Do you want me to leave the copy?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. "Not because I don't trust you. Because if it is hers, I want it to be inside your investigation until it has taught you everything it can teach. Then I'll want to hear it again in a quiet place." He nodded. "I can't promise an ending." "You can promise not to stop at the polite place," she said. "That's easier." 26. The circle that kept its shape. By winter, the official stance was, "Thank you," and "stand down." The captain read the memo from USFS aloud, in a tone that pretended not to be irritated. Words like legacy infrastructure and stabilization and public safety made a wall. Behind it, a smaller door contact liaison for further coordination stayed unlocked but did not open when pushed. Rhodes did the thing good detectives do when doors turn ornamental. He narrowed. He wasn't going to unmask an institution or stage a mutiny. He was going to keep working the human case, Hale, and because it mattered, Brewer. He mapped sightings, equipment noises, radio anomalies, sightings of headlights that had no vehicle, compass errors, the ham repeater knocks. The scatter looked like litter until he drew the ring 10 miles across, Clear Creek at its chord, Site B near its heart. At the center of his board, he wrote 4 words, so no one could pretend later he hadn't said them. She found the access. He stood back. He pictured a woman in a rain jacket, hands chilled, pen light in pocket, saying, "I'm not stepping on anything heavy." He pictured a hatch that had learned how to be ground. He pictured 3 knocks the way secular men picture prayer. Not for answers, but so the room knows they are there. He turned off the office light. The badge in his desk drawer, where Inoin recovered, at a place that someone did not want to be a place anymore, glinted once, as if to verify it had not imagined itself. Outside, October practiced being November. The forest, having been asked too many questions, and given too few. Rearranged rain on leaves like a man shuffling papers he has read 3 times already. What comes next will ask the oldest question since someone first cut a tunnel. Why was it built? And for whom did it continue after the sign said, "Decommissioned"? But that is part 3. For now, the last image is practical. A copy of a tape, a photograph from 1979, a sketch labeled Site B, and an evidence bag with a pen light scratched DH4 modest objects on a table that, together, suggest a door. Rhodes wrote a single line in his notebook before he slept. "We are not lost. We're standing on top of the thing that hides us from each other, and below it, smaller. Find the hinge." 27. Interlude. The forest in winter snow arrived early that year, but the mountain didn't wear it kindly. By mid-November, Clear Creek froze in thin sheets that cracked when touched and healed again overnight. The forest went colorless. Trees exhaled steam like beasts asleep. Detective Michael Rhodes kept driving east anyway. His colleagues joked that he was auditing ghosts, but the jokes came softly, as if even laughter had to apply for permission. He told no one that he returned each weekend to the same point on the same service road, parking his car on the shoulder, where the red forestry paint still stained trunks, like a warning written in haste. Each time, he found the soil smoothed, sometimes tamped, once dusted with lime. Someone or something sanctioned was tending the ground, as though to keep it calm. He started bringing a small recorder, not because he expected sound, but because silence deserves to be measured. Sometimes the playback contained only wind, sometimes, faintly, the low hum of electricity where no wires lived. 28. The letter no one owned. The envelope arrived at his office on December 3, 2022. No postmark, no return address, typed on an old machine that still believed in ribbons. Inside, a single page. Detective Rhodes, you have asked questions about an installation formerly known as Hollow CC-77. The facility was decommissioned in 1973, following the collapse of its sponsoring division. The structure you located is not hazardous to the public. Please refrain from further excavation. All recovered materials remain property of the United States government. Administrative Liaison, Federal Lands Oversight Office. He looked up the office. It did not exist, at least not online, not in any current directory, not even in the shadow lists of agencies that used to be and had since been merged, renamed, or forgiven. He read the letter again. The line, "The structure you located," was the only phrase that felt human. Everything else read like an automated defense mechanism. He filed it, not in evidence, but between two folders marked Personal Notes and Pending Closure. Paper, like grief, likes company. 29. The engineer who remembered nothing. The Brewer case from 1979 had one living witness left. Charles Hinckley, 79 now, retired electrical engineer, once part of a private contractor team hired by the Forestry Service for signal integrity studies. Rhodes found him in a senior complex outside Eugene. Hinckley's memory wandered, but sometimes it stepped back into focus like a lens-finding light. "We were measuring interference," the old man said. "Shortwave bounce, magnetics, that sort of thing. There was a lot of Cold War money in making sure messages didn't echo where they shouldn't." "What was Project Hollow?" The man frowned, as if chewing on a nail. "You know that name. It's in your ledgers." He rubbed his forehead. "Not a project. More of a shell. We built tests inside it. Underground chambers, lined with steel. Wanted to see how far a low-frequency signal would carry through rock. Only ran a few months. Then the plug was pulled. They sealed the shafts and told us to forget we'd ever mapped them." "And Brewer?" Hinckley's eyes shifted. "He stayed behind after hours once. Said he'd left his field meter down there. The next day the place was locked and our IDs stopped working. We were told he'd resigned. I thought that meant something else. Could Dana Hale have found one of those sealed chambers? Could have. Shouldn't have. We filled them in." He hesitated. "Unless they kept one open for later. They always keep one open." 30. The second descent Rhodes didn't tell anyone he was going back. He left a note on his desk that read, "Routine follow-up field inspection." He drove out before dawn on December 11th with a small pack, headlamp, and a body camera set to continuous record. The slope looked different under frost, but muscle memory guided him. He found the cedar its bark, now scarred by red spray marks. He walked 30 paces northeast and tapped the ground with his boot. The soil sounded hollow. Someone had filled the hatch, yes, but not well. Beneath 2 inches of new earth lay a thin crust of disturbed gravel. He used a folding spade, methodical, until metal surfaced again. The same curve, the same hinge line. He didn't dig out the bolts. The bolts were gone. Instead, the plate lifted with surprising ease, as if whoever had buried it wanted it found again someday. Cold air rose, stale, metallic, faintly electrical. He lowered the light. The ladder waited. Clean. 31. The room at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel hadn't changed. Narrow, steel-ribbed, a corridor built by people who never expected to need beauty. But where the bulkhead had once been sealed, a gap now yawned enough for a man to pass sideways. He ducked through. The room beyond was roughly 15 feet square. Shelves leaned. Cables drooped like dead veins. On the far wall, a panel still glowed faintly green, impossible without power. He followed the cable run and saw a small generator the size of a suitcase, humming softly. On the table, 2 cassette recorders, one tagged USFS Audio 1979, the other Hale Unit 214. Beside them, a folder wrapped in wax paper labeled Incident Log CC-77, Final Phase. He photographed everything before touching anything. Inside the folder, half-typed, half-handwritten notes, dated Oct 1979 through Feb 1980. Test series produced unexpected acoustic events in Chamber B. Possible harmonic feedback between structures. Review mechanical isolation. Personnel report hearing knocking when generator cycles below 40 Hz. Recommendation: suspend operations pending safety audit. Audit never conducted. The last page bore a single line in darker ink. Project terminated. Site sealed. Residual field stable. Do not re-enter. Rhodes exhaled through his teeth. He took the recorder marked Hale and pressed play. Static. Rain, her breathing. Then, if anyone finds this, I'm under the main access. The walls are vibrating with something. Feels like pressure, not sound. Not a cave-in. The metal's moving, but it's not falling. I think a distortion swallowed her voice. Then 3 knocks, closer than on any previous recording. Then nothing but the heartbeat of the recorder itself. He rewound, played it again, let the silence finish speaking. 32. The return above ground. He surfaced near dusk. Frost had thickened on the duff, and his footprints looked too deliberate to be forgiven. He closed the hatch carefully and piled branches over it, not to hide, but to keep the wind from telling stories. Driving down the mountain, he rehearsed how to report what he had found. Every version ended with someone taking it away from him. By the time he reached cell service, he chose a different tactic. He sent 3 identical envelopes. One to his captain, one to Mara Ellison, and one to Karen Hale. Each containing a USB drive with copies of the photographs, the scans, and a transcription of the folder notes. He wrote a single line on the sticky note inside. If anything happens, everything you need is in the audio. Then he went home and waited to see what silence would do next. 33. The callback. 2 days later, Mara called first. Her voice shook, not from fear, but from the weight of too much proof. I ran the metadata on your audio, she said. The Hale recorder wasn't analog. The file you sent, it's digital. Timestamp says created 3 months ago. That's impossible. I know. Unless someone re-recorded her voice through an analog filter to make it sound old. Or, she trailed off. Or what? Or it's been running this whole time. She sent him a clip, a slowed waveform that revealed a faint carrier tone under the knocks. When converted to binary spacing, it read 4 letters, repeated. H-O-L-L. The pattern stopped before the final O. Rhodes rubbed his eyes. Could be coincidence. Could be, she said. But that's not how you sound when you believe it. 34. The agency visit. They came on December 18th. 2 men in civilian clothes with ID cards that identified them only as Federal Land Safety Division. The captain invited Rhodes into his own office as a buffer. "We appreciate your cooperation," one of the men said, in the tone of someone reciting a spell that keeps doors closed. "We're classifying your recent field activity as part of an ongoing environmental assessment. The materials you obtained will be logged and stored appropriately." "What's in the chamber?" Rhodes asked. "A decommissioned research facility," the second man said. "Electromagnetic resonance studies. Nothing criminal, nothing supernatural, nothing for public concern." "Then why the secrecy?" "To prevent trespass," the first said, "and hysteria. People love haunted stories more than they love facts." When they left, they carried a box that supposedly contained everything Rhodes had recovered. He checked his desk drawer after they were gone. The USB drive he'd kept for redundancy was still there. He didn't tell anyone. 35. The Christmas signal. On December 24th at 11:47 p.m., Rhodes sat alone in his living room with the lights off and the USB plugged into his laptop. He played the Hale recording again. Same breathing, same 3 knocks, same static. But this time, something new. Barely audible behind the hiss. A voice. Fainter than the first layer, almost imagined. "Michael, leave it closed." He froze. He replayed the segment. The words remained. He opened the waveform editor, isolated the sound. The signature matched Hale's voice print from 2002. The rational explanation, the only one, was that someone had mixed audio from her previous tapes to fabricate a warning. But no such sample existed in the official logs. He sat back, let the screen light his face, and listened to the end. After the final knock, another sound bled through soft metallic scraping, as if something below the microphone had shifted position for the first time in years. He closed the laptop, wrote a short report titled "Hollow, Anomalous Recording," and saved it to a secure drive. He did not send it to anyone. 36. Epilogue. 20 years and counting. In the spring of 2023, the county paved a new access spur near Clear Creek. The construction plan showed a harmless note. Stabilized slope, no excavation permitted beyond 2 meters. The hatch, if it still existed, was now beneath 3 feet of asphalt. Mara Ellison published an article called "The Forest That Swallowed Its Own Secret." It mentioned no names, no coordinates, and no agencies. It ended with a quote from Karen Hale. "My daughter used to say the woods were like people. You think you know them until they show you the part that never needed you." Every October, radios near the ridge still catch a faint carrier hum on quiet nights. Sometimes it fades into nothing. Sometimes 3 slow, patient knocks. 37. Coda, the desk drawer Rhodes retired in 2024. He keeps a small box on his desk at home. Inside it, the pen light, the badge, and a folded note that reads, "If not back, by 2300, check Site B." Sometimes, out of habit, he clicks the pen light on. The beam flickers, but never fails completely. He doesn't know if that means the batteries are immortal or just unwilling. In the drawer beneath it lies a sealed envelope addressed to future investigator. Open. Only if you hear knocking. He laughs at himself for writing it. Then, when the house is very still and rain ticks the windows in sets of 3, he stops laughing and listens. Because somewhere under the oldest cedar in the county, metal waits to be struck again. And the forest patient, practiced, will answer when it's ready.